כן. אחר כך נעשה שאלות. נעשה בסוף שאלות. Thank you all. Our last speaker is a visitor from one of the most celebrated libraries in the world, the British Library, Mr. Aly Conteh, a digitization program manager at the British Library and a member of the executive board of the Impact project.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here, and I thank the organisers for inviting me to speak. I must just set my timer. I can speak for a long time on this subject, so I don't want to ruin the timing. So, as I said, I'm the digitisation program manager at the British Library, and it's a fantastic job. I mean, the British Library is a place. British Library is actually a relatively new institution. It was created in 1972 by the British Library Act. Prior to that, we were part of the British Museum, the British Museum Library. And prior to that, a lot of our content, our ancient content, was created through individuals who sort of collected and stored and preserved and disseminated this information, and that's the role that we have taken on. This is our building. We moved into it in 1998, and it's a manifestation of the British Library. It's a place you can go to interact with this knowledge. Of course, things have moved on, and we have another manifestation of the British Library. That's the ability to go to our website and to interact with our content. But, I'm afraid there is a huge disconnect between what you would be able to go and consult at our physical building and what you can consult here at the bl.uk. And by my reckoning, we're maybe talking about 1 or 2% of what we have you can get to through this channel. And so part of my job at the British Library is to try and increase those numbers. We say our first digitisation project was a digitisation of the Beowulf manuscript in 1994. There was some preliminary and experimental stuff we had done prior to that, but this was really our first digitised resource. And it was a CD-ROM based product. And we've continued digitising. I'm going to use some of the numbers that Oren talked about. We have digitised about 4 million pages of pre-1900 newspapers. We've digitised about 25 million pages. That equates to around 70,000 books. And a whole lot of other things. I was interested when Shazaf was talking about his view that the thing that was least worthy was the bindings. Well, actually, one of the digitised resources we've created is just of bindings. For some people, that is the most interesting part of the book. But as I said, we have a long way to go. We have sound recordings like they do have here. This is an example of a resource where you can actually get a sense of the different dialects and sounds across the UK. So it's a great medium, isn't it? Moving things to digital. And I was trying to think about my first experience with this. My background is in IT. I started off as a software engineer. And back in the early 90s, we were using the Microsoft development environment to do our coding. And So what you get, they would come on, they would install it on our PC, and then you would get the manuals, instructions, the guidance notes, and it was a pack about this long. So you had something like 50 floppy disks and a pack this long. So as you looked for information, when you wanted to answer a question, you wanted guidance, there was a big sort of index to say which of the ones you needed to look at. You went to that one, looked at the index, and it was a quite time-consuming activity. But relatively quickly, that moved to a fully searchable resource on the desktop. Not connected, you're on your own, but reduce the time significantly to find any information to help you. And that was sort of my first experience of some of the affordances of digital. Okay, so books. Well, my role is to try and take a shelf of books like this and make them available in digital form, so they can be consulted, and some of the benefits of digital can be realised. So for me, when I look at a row of books like that, I guess I have a different perspective. So what I'm thinking of is, for the approach we're taking, can I digitise all of those books? So I might have a scanning station that may have some constraints. So, am I able to digitise the large book? Will it actually fit? Or are the books too small? Or are they too thick? But the other thing I think about is I don't see 12 books maybe there. I'm thinking of in terms of images. How many images am I going to need to take to digitally recreate that row of books? And it's interesting because now what we're doing is we're taking this physical thing and sort of deconstructing it into a number of individual elements. So a book that has 200 pages, I might have 200 images, but I also have the binding, the spine, front and back. So maybe 205 images. And so I think what is the task that's ahead of us as the British Library? Well, we state we have somewhere in the region of 15 to 16 million books. And I know based on the projects we've done today, we're talking about 3.5 billion pages to be digitised. And it just points to the challenge, I was going to say the problem, but the challenge of getting all our knowledge that exists in physical form into a digital representation. Now, not all of the work falls on the British Library, because there are books there that will be hosted in other libraries, and they will do the job. We don't have particularly good mechanisms in place in this community to actually know that such and such has already digitised it, and so we don't need to. But we reckon that the British Library maybe 30 to 40% of what we have is either unique or is really the only copy that's in a condition to be accessed and to be digitised. So, even though we don't have to do all of that, it's a big challenge that's ahead of us. And so, in my role to convert, to do this transformation from the physical to the digital representation, that there are many challenges. And now I'm sort of making the movement from my role at the British Library and a role that I hold in a project called the Impact Project. So if we think about what we are digitising, there are a number of considerations we need to take into account. And one of them is actually the condition of the items we're going to digitise. So I've got just some examples here of some of the challenges we have. So one of them, and I don't know how well it will show up, will be bleed through, where the ink over time, you can sort of just there, where you can see a heading on the other side of the page as you can see, has bled through, has come through. You can probably see it a bit better here, but you can see a lot of artifacts below the text. Actually, for you and I, it isn't a problem. We can discern what we should be reading and what we shouldn't be reading. So when we hand this over to the computer and say, tell us what the text says, it doesn't have the powers that we have to differentiate. We have other issues. A lot of our content is bound. Even when we're talking about things like newspapers, we've bound those newspapers over time, and we have to digitize them as bound volumes. I sort of came to the library from a publisher where we were doing digitizing. We were digitizing modern text, but they would come in and we would cut off the spine and take the bindings off and then put them in a high-speed feeder. Obviously, for these historic texts, that's not an option. But what you can see is text is lost, and actually there isn't a great deal we can do about that. It's one of the challenges, I guess one of the issues we have to live with. And even such quirky things as artifacts that are introduced by a dog or a cat walking across this page when it was at the printer, or a wasp that unfortunately got squashed. And whilst you can remove the wasp, some of what's left behind does interfere with the digitisation. So how does that then manifest itself as we try and extract the text? And why are we extracting the text? Because we want to support things like full text searching. Because what digitisation brings us, and having this material in digital, whereas a while back if you wanted to find particular phrases in a pile of books or a pile of newspapers, that involved you flipping through. We can support through digitisation full text searching of this material. So if we take a snippet of text here, and this is where we see some of the effects of the binding of this material. I can see that some of you are reading this article. It's one of my favourites. But the interesting thing is, you're reading it, you're not actually having that much of a problem. When we come to the computer and when we come to it OCRing, what it really wants is lovely straight lines, very well defined characters. And with our historic text, we can't promise that. And so what the computer sees, and think about the way the text sort of slants upward at the end, what our computer sees is that. When we OCR it sees that. And you can see, particularly on the left-hand side, my left, a lot of text there that, well, they're just not words. To use a good old English phrase, they're gobbledygook. And how much of a problem is that? Well, I guess it depends on how you then interact with these resources. So we know from our newspaper project that our average accuracy rating was about 75%. So that means 75% of the words were correctly identified. And that's great. If you're a half full person, you can say, well, there's 75% of that content that I can search across. If you're on a half empty kind of person, you say, but there's 25% that's missing, that's invisible, that's hidden. And I guess the important thing is that's taken into account for any research that is done using this material. And of course we're looking to improve that. Another type of problem I sort of stumbled across when I was doing a bit of testing of our newspaper project. And actually what I wanted to do was to see, well, how well did this resource behave when there are no hits, there's no result set. We want to make sure it deals with that elegantly and gives a nice report to say there's nothing. So let's think of a word. So I thought of the word internet. That seems relatively new. As you can probably guess from the heading, I got a hit. Actually, I got quite a few hits. And I thought, well, that's just me. I don't understand maybe how that word was used in the 19th century. But on closer investigation, actually the word isn't internet. You might not be able to see it, but it should be interest. But some of the characters are some broken characters. It's very faint. And so what's sort of happening behind the scene is, the computer saying, well, I've identified all this text. One of the things it does is says, there are some texts that I'm not really sure what they are. And so what I'll do is I'll take my sort of best guess, use a dictionary and say, this is my best guess of what this word should be. And it came up with internet. And I've looked and looked and looked, and I've never found a valid use for the word internet in the 19th century. So Google, I think earlier this year or end of last year, and we've seen it already, this Ngram. So it was interested that I tried this to see, is this just an isolated? So this is from the Google book between 1800 to 1900, the instances of the word internet. Once again, I've looked at some of those books to say, well, maybe there is a valid use of it. I haven't found one. You can see the percentages are quite small. But there is another challenge, another issue for us to deal with. So with this kind of content, we have things like the geometric distortions, which make it difficult to identify the text, the quality of the source material. We might want to focus on significant words, the name of a place or event or a person, and we can have these false positives by using modern dictionaries. In reality, what we're looking is we want a digitized book to be on par with a born digital book, where you can identify these things, where you can be pretty sure, if not 100%, you're getting 99.99% accuracy. So the British Library, with a number of other institutions, made a proposal to the European Commission that we form this project called Impact, which is really looking at how can we advance the state of the art in extracting text from historical documents through automated procedures like optical character recognition, to dealing with some of the language challenges by building historical lexica. So we have 26 partners across Europe and wider. We have a number of national libraries, including, of course, the British, the Dutch, Germans, Austrians, French, Spanish, a number of research institutions who are looking at some of these problems. And we have two commercial partners, one being IBM and their research lab in Xi'fa, and a company based in Moscow called Abbey, who produce a product called FineReader, which certainly in the cultural heritage sector is one of the leading OCR tools. So we've come together, we've taken these challenges, and we want to look at how we address the problem. We're in the final year of a 4-year project. This project's coordinated by the Dutch logo. I'm going to move on because I'm running out of time, but very quickly. So what are some of the things we're focused on then? As I said, we want to advance the state of the art. So we want to look at, well, what sort of image process and what enhancements can we make to the image to do things like straighten out some of the geometric distortions. How we can, segmentation relates to actually what's happening behind the scenes. What OCR really wants to do is to identify each individual character, match it to its pattern database to say, oh, this is an A and this is a C, build up words and say, you know, we're fairly certain that this is a word. So how can it do that effectively when you've got things like broken characters and obsolete fonts and such like. So we work in that area. We want to improve the language resources. So not only are we building historical lexica in English, in Dutch, in German, French, but there are about 6 or 7 languages we're building, but also a set of tools that will allow others to build historical lexica in their own language. And it's also about building capability in how you go about these type of activities. What are optimum end-to-end workflows? And that will be incorporated in a centre of competence, which is a sort of sustainable vehicle that will keep the activities of the impact project running after the end when the project completes in December of this year. And also how we can bring in the crowdsourcing tools, because I firmly believe there's only so much we can do in automated ways using the computer. And actually the power in getting digitized resources to be on par with born digital resources is when we can also use human beings to improve the quality of the output. Resources aren't sufficient that we can take 4 million pages and say, well, we'll get just a group of people to rekey and double rekey. So if we can use the community to aid not only in correcting but also in training the OCR tools, then we will significantly improve what we are doing. I think I'm fractionally over time, but that's my talk today. Thank you.